right, so thank you again for waiting. I would love to introduce you to Father Augustine. When I first met Father Augustine, he was Brother Augustine. And I was in junior high. He was an assistant coach for the cross-country team. And we were glad that he was a monk. But we also all knew that he was different from the other monks. Different in the sense of mischief-making, his fun-loving ways, and the fact that he seemed to be more playing with us than actually coaching us. Maybe coaching with chaos, something like that. Especially when we were playing the most amazing and confusing game of all time.
Oh!
P-ball. In which there are no rules, except the ruls that he made up as we went along. I don't even remember what kind of ball we used to play the game with. I don't think it was really important what kind of ball we used.
Sometimes there was a man who was the ball. One of the students was the ball.
So he was also different in that we called him Augustine. At least behind his back. I don't know if
that
ever
was my face.
addressed him that way. But he was Augustine. So in short, Father Augustine was the cool monk. Having not been a student at Clare in quite a while, I'm not sure if that's still the case, but I hope it is.
A what?
That you're the cool monk?
Oh, no, there are other cooler monks now.
So I never really saw him as an author or a presenter. I think maybe he had just started teaching some junior school classes when I was graduating from the high school. And in my experience, his wit with words was limited to dubbing me, when I was all of 6 foot and 140 pounds soaking wet, as a skinny flinny. And even more witty when I filled out a little bit as not so skinny. So perhaps my not seeing him as an author or wordsmith was somewhat justified. Be that as it may, it is my great pleasure to introduce Father Augustine, a man who has brightened my life, as our speaker this evening. I certainly hope that he will brighten your lives as well. So welcome, Father Augustine.
Yeah, Matt, he's here at the round table.
Okay, story of my life. Well, story of tonight. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay. You know what? Oh, we're recording this, aren't we? Can we turn the volume down a little bit? Because maybe this is a little much for most people to handle. Even me to handle. And I love hearing myself. Saint Benedict, great. There's a reason why every liturgy starts out with an apology. And so I'm going to start my talk with an apology. Well, actually, no. No, I'm not going to start with the not apology. I'm going to start with a prayer, because Saint Benedict says that a monk must pray that God will, before he begins any good work, he must pray that God will finish it for him. So, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. God, finish this for me. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. In fact, it would have been nice if he'd started it for me about 15 minutes ago. This wasn't actually part of my talk, but I'm going to start with it anyway, which is that St. Benedict says that when you perceive that your brother is distressed, that you immediately throw yourself on the floor and beg for a blessing. So I'm going to start with that. Matt, may I have your blessing, please? You were giving it, I wasn't looking. Okay, good. Yeah, it's very awkward, isn't it? And that's the point, I think, I've actually been teaching this to kids all across the country. About 2 years ago, I wrote a book, and it went viral, and now the Abbey finally gave me the year off of school just to travel around and give retreats. And I was just up in Nashville with talking to a bunch of the Dominican nuns up there have a bunch of schools, and so they asked me to give my talk. And we got on to apologies because Lent is coming up, and really Lent is about just apologizing to God for for 40 days, not including Sundays. And St. Benedict has this really novel, very ancient way of apologizing, which isn't actually an apology. I don't know if you noticed, but I didn't actually apologize to Matt just then. I threw myself on my face and asked for a blessing. And I do this, predictably, I do this all the time. Because even my elder brother monks call me the late Father Augustine for reasons I don't have to go into this time. But so I do this frequently, but most often just for things I say rather than for things I do. In fact, I have a background in stand-up comedy, and so I can get rolling sometimes. In fact, I remember early in my years at St. Louis Abbey, we have what we call mandatory fun after meals, officially called Corona, where the monks sit around and talk to each other. And I was really on a roll, and I got this monk going, and this one, and I was telling jokes, and I had everybody laughing. And afterwards, the abbot came up to me and he said, "Oh, Brother Augustine, you have a shining star of a personality. But sometimes lesser stars need to shine." So that was the beginning. It wasn't very long ago that I was at a faculty meeting and I told a joke, which to this day I do not think was offensive. But apparently one of our faculty did, and she came up to me afterwards and told me so. And I didn't think it was offensive. I didn't feel sorry for telling it. In fact, I got a good laugh. I felt good about myself. But St. Benedict doesn't say, wait till you figure out who's wrong. So I hit the floor and I said, "May I have your blessing, please?" And I waited for the blessing, because St. Benedict says you can't get up until you get the blessing. So I waited and I waited and I waited, and there's just silence. So I was like, I'm going to be down here for a while. But I looked up and she was going like this. And she says, "I was wrong." Which is like the fastest way I've ever won an argument. And it turns out that there's like human biology behind this too. That when you encounter someone who is really, truly, physically helpless in front of you, your brain, I just read this like 2 weeks ago, your brain releases something or other, oxytocin. Thank you. With some doctors over here or something. And then you're like compelled against your will to be nice to them, which is extremely useful for me. This wasn't intended to be funny, by the way. Father Timothy, God bless him, he died about a year ago. 6'4", red hair. Did you get to take any? Did you know? I guess you knew him. He special forces during World War II. He commanded a Gurkha regiment, which they were so vicious, they were the only troops that the Japanese would willingly surrender to, because they were so violent. But so Father Timothy is an intimidating kind of guy, gentle, noble, literally noble. His great grandfather was little Jack Horner, who sat in a corner with the thumb in the pie. Interesting sort of side note, he was a groundskeeper at a Benedictine monastery and sold them out to Cromwell and got a big chunk of their property as a thank you. And that was the plum, right? So it's sort of an anti-Protestant little ditty. But irony of ironies, his last living heir was Father Timothy Horner, who became a monk. But in any case, so Timothy I guess I forgot to return the keys to the car, and I just realized as I was walking up here that I have 2 monastery car keys in my pocket at this very moment. And I don't need them both, I can guarantee you. In fact, well, anyway, and he missed a funeral, which was a big deal. And I knew he was going to be mad, and I saw him coming from the end of the hallway. And lucky for me, he was 96 and very slow. So I hit the ground and just waited. And he knew what I was up to, because I do this so often, it actually annoys my brethren. But by the time he got to me, he was laughing. And he kicked me softly. I mean, he's 96, so, you know, what damage can you do? And then he rubbed my head and gave me a blessing, and all was good. And actually, to close out my little bit on apologies, I recommend this. The next time you're really in deep with somebody who kind of understands you, because it can be very strange too. Well, no, even if especially if they don't understand you, let it get strange. I do recommend this as a Lenten project, because come on, you're going to make somebody mad by the end of the week, probably, statistically speaking. But I actually got a fan letter from a kid I was talking to in Nashville, who said he totaled his parents' car. Yeah, and the police drove him home. And when he got home, his parents had already heard and were waiting for him, both of them sitting on the couch. And so he thought, like, I got nothing to lose here. So he hit the floor and begged for their blessing. And he wrote, I wish I brought it with me. He wrote to me, my dad got embarrassed and left the room, and my mother started crying, and I totally got out of it. So that's that. Let me see. I did have a talk I wanted to give eventually. We were going to talk about, in fact, you specifically asked for silence, and was it obedience? I can't even remember at this point. Okay, yeah, and as long as I'm here, he's pretty happy. Well, I actually, just 2 days ago, no, it was yesterday. God, see, this is where I get in trouble, because I get mixed up. I was giving a retreat to the youth ministers of St. Louis, and then I ran out of things to say. And you can only give, I mean, a silent retreat is great as long as you mean for it to be a silent retreat. But so I stayed up, but I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night and I realized what I wanted to say. And I started it with a quote, and maybe I'll use this as my little pattern here, because I wasn't, well, no, let's talk about silence first. No, I'm going to go with it. I wanted to start with a quote from Fiona Apple, who said, "The only person you have to be true to is yourself," which is like the stupidest thing a rock star has ever said, period. Not only is it wrong on the surface, I mean, just wrong by everyone's account, but it's a misquote of Shakespeare, who said, "To thine own self be true," which has a seed of truth, but is in fact pronounced by Polonius, who's one of the biggest goobers in all of Shakespearean literature. His name actually means reheated cabbage. Okay? And "to thine own self be true" comes at the end of a long string of platitudes, including, let's see, I wrote them all out here. Well, who cares? The point is, he says a bunch of stupid things and ends with, "and to thine own self be true." And about, actually, it might have been someone in your class, because I've been telling this story for a long time. It was Chad Huber. Is he your class? No, not even close, I bet. Chad, who turns up in a lot of my sermons, because he decided to become an atheist in 7th grade. Because he knew it would annoy us. Incidentally, once he got to college, he converted back to Catholicism because he realized it was more annoying to be Catholic. In my ethics class, my senior ethics class, we were talking about something or other, and he suddenly stands up, he turns around to the rest of the group, and he goes, "I see you on weekends. I know what you do. You call yourselves Catholics, but I know you. Like, I've been there. I see you. He says, at least I'm true to myself, right? Which you got to give the credit. Like, I mean, that takes a lot of guts. And he was holding them to a standard they were trying to follow, or not trying to follow, as it were. But this one kid in the back of this class who had been asleep all year wakes up just for this and says, hell, at least we're trying to be true to someone better than us, and goes back to sleep. Couldn't have said it better myself. That's where I want to start with my little Lenten reflection here. And by the way, I've got an hour, right? Or what time do I have to stop?
8:30.
Okay, good. Because this is us trying to be true to somebody better than us. And so we're going to fail. We're going to start with failure. I actually, one year I asked, well, I couldn't think of anything to talk to the faculty about, but I was the chaplain, and it was Lent, and I realized I had a Lenten retreat to give, and so I did what I always do. I gave it to someone else to do, and I asked Jerry Hills to give the Lenten retreat, and he's kind of a grumpy, kind of hard-smoking, hard-drinking fella, and he gave one of the best reflections I've ever heard. When he was 11, his father smoked. And when he was 11, he took up smoking for Lent because he hated it so much. He thought this was a way to discipline the body and to pray for his father at the same time. Like, he would smoke a cigarette, or half a cigarette every day, as penance for his sins and in honor of his dad. And of course he got caught. And then he got in trouble, and he said, ever since then, I have failed in my Lenten resolutions. Like, every year, I give up something, or I try to do something extra, and every year I come up short. And he says, and I think that's the whole point of Lent. Like, it's not so much to do the penance as to show you how little you can accomplish on your own. So I was thinking about this 2 nights ago. And then I subscribed to a magazine called McSweeney's, which is sort of Mad Magazine for literary types. And it's generally not very funny. But there was an essay or a article called Fragments from the Ancient Gospels of the Church of a Pretty Good God. And I'll read some of the excerpts from them. One is, thou shalt keep the 7th day holy, and it shall be a day of rest, unless thou hast something important to do, and thou canst not do it any other day. The people agreed it was very sensible. This is the church, the Gospels of the Pretty Good God. And that, I mean, if you read the Old Testament and the New Testament, I mean, even Jesus is very reluctant to break that command. I mean, if you, before I went to Oxford, they have this very sort of basic way of doing things. I was advised just to read the Bible, cover to cover, just beginning to end. And the one thing that stood out was, keep holy the Sabbath. Like, that is really, really key. And yet I think we've reduced it to, unless something important and you can't really do anything else, in which case God kind of understands. I think one thing to do this Lent is to really rediscover that holy day, Sunday, keeping holy the Sabbath. It was C.S. Lewis who said, we don't so much want, folks these days don't so much want, I'm going to misquote him, but I misquote more people before 7 a.m. than most people do all day. He said something along the lines of, folks these days don't so much want a heavenly father as they want a heavenly grandfather, right? A kind of senile old guy who doesn't much care what the young folk do so long as no one gets hurt, And he's not likely to remember it later anyway, right? But but God is God, and they're commandments, not suggestions, right? And one of them is keep holy the Sabbath. And furthermore, as Catholics, as opposed to our evangelical brethren, we do not see salvation as merely a personal relationship with Jesus. It's essential. We've got to have a relationship with Jesus, a personal relationship with Jesus at that. But we are saved as part of a team, as part of a community, right? And it's only there that we are able to be drawn into the Trinity. Which is itself a community. at heart, right? Even God is not alone, one, right? So getting to Mass on Sunday, I tell the kids, confirmation means 3 M's. Martyrdom, you have to join the monastery, and thirdly, or get married, whatever. And then the third one is Mass every single Sunday for the rest of your life, unless you're sick or traveling by ox cart. Okay, so next. Magdine asked, no, I'm going to skip that one. The Lord said, the kingdom of heaven will be much like the kingdom of earth. Thou shalt still work, but thou shalt have nicer clothes and for some a fancy headband. This is my covenant with you. And the people said, well, we could do worse. Right? I think along similar lines, I think we have reduced Christ to a group therapist, someone who kind of says, yeah, the kingdom of heaven is going to be kind of nice. And, C.S. Lewis, of course, said, well, Chad, I'll come right back to Chad here for a second. And Chad said one day in class that, he asked if there was going to be sex in heaven. And I said no. And he said, okay, then I'm not going. And so I realized the error of my ways. And I said, in a way there is, because everything on earth is a pale reflection of God. And so he said, so we're having sex with God. And I said, no. No. And he said, well, then who are we going to have sex with? Because, of course, if television has taught Chad anything, it's that this is the end-all, be-all of human existence. And without it, life is not worth living. I forgot the end of the story. Oh, yes, right. Which is that C.S. Lewis, this is what right. C.S. Lewis said, again, back to C.S. Lewis, he said, trying to describe heaven to someone who's alive is like trying to describe college to a kindergartner, right? Chad doesn't have anything else to measure human delight with besides what he sees on television. And so naturally, heaven sounds like a real drag. And in my defense, Jesus can't find anything better than a loaf of bread or a bush, a really big bush, to compare heaven to. And the more you try to describe it, the worse it sounds. Is it going to be cookies and milk in college? Well, no. In fact, you're probably going to drink beer. That sounds awful. Right? Is it going to be nap time? Are we going to have to talk to girls? Things like that. But heaven is what this is all about, right? And in particular, death is what this is all about. Whenever you give a retreat, said St. John Henry Newman, you should focus on 3 things: death, heaven, and hell. And monks are really good at thinking about death because St. Benedict says that John Cashin says, first of all, that's why we wear black, is to remind us constantly when we look at ourselves or look at one another, we say, we're going to die. But that's the whole point of, frankly, of living, is to get to death. And there's really no other way to get to heaven besides dying first. In fact, in the monastery, our senior wing overlooks the graveyard so that they can see, that's where I'm heading right away. And Father Luke used to say, just chuck me out the window right there. And I'll just dig the hole from now, and you don't even have to wait to, In fact, I was walking past his room. He's deceased now, of course. Well, not of course, but he is. He was my novice master, and so I have a great affection for Father Luke, and I would walk past his room, and I'd say, hello, Father. The first time it happened, it was a shock. I said, good morning, Father Luke, and he said, good morning, and I said, how are you? And he said, waiting to die. And I said, are you okay? And he said, yeah, I'm doing great. You gotta have something to look forward to, right? So monks really, unless you're the Blessed Virgin, you really have to die before you get to heaven. And so monks look forward to the day of their death. 2 weeks ago, we had our funeral for Father Paul. And when and this is a little extreme, right, actually, I'm not even sure I completely agree with it, but when he found out he had colon cancer, I said, Father Paul, I'm so sorry. And he said, not at all. I've been praying for a slow, painful death. and he said, I want to get all my purgatory out of the way, and I want to know it's coming. I want to be ready. And he was. God bless him. But there's another reason why monks think about death every day. In fact, every hour, says John Cashin. Is because it affects the way you treat one another. And again, this is another purpose of Lent. I mean, St. Benedict says that the monk's whole life is a constant Lent. He said, but Lent is even more Lenti for the monk than the rest of the year. Because the monk must constantly keep into account that anyone around him, including him, could be dead by the end of the day, you know. And this is a really hard thing mostly I talk to teenagers, in case you can't tell. But this is a really hard thing to convince them of. Nonetheless, you know, every now and then one of them dies. And then all of a sudden they're all shocked and don't know how to cope with it because they've had no preparation. They think they're going to live forever. And so I tell them about Brother Ed, was Brother Ed around when you were here? He was... Well, every monastery is sort of a microcosm of the church. So there's a complete sort of community within the monastery, including, you know, fat monks and skinny monks and smart monks and stupid monks and hardworking monks and lazy monks. And every monastery has one really crazy monk. That every monastery I visited has a crazy monk. And our crazy monk was Brother Ed Dahlheimer, who, he, by crazy, I don't mean he was like, you know, crazy, bro. I mean, he was like, he had invisible animals in his room that talked to him. Like really off the deep end. Nonetheless, he struggled hard to maintain his sanity and to be a basically decent sort of fellow. He was also, and I think this is why he ended up in the monastery, was something of a genius. At the age of 75, he taught himself, he was a big fan of blues, and he could tell you anything you wanted to know about any blues musician up until about 1960. And so at the age of 75, he decided to learn the harmonica. But he couldn't read music, so he invented his own musical notation based on colors. And if you ever visit St. Louis Abbey, I'll show you our archives have these little black books that are all colors. Nobody can read them, but apparently it's music, because he committed over 500 bluegrass tunes to memory, right? And he was also an authority on Ernest Hemingway. And he could tell you anything you wanted to know about Hemingway. And his prized possession, and he was an oblate of what we call a claustral oblate, so he was allowed to own things, was a autographed first edition of The Sun Also Rises, which had its own special place in his room. Never let me see it, because Brother Ed was like obsessive compulsive, I think they call it. He would come into choir and everything had to be, he would come in like 20 minutes early and arrange his books for about 20 minutes so that they were perfectly parallel. And when he died, every piece of furniture in his room was glued to the floor. Right? So it would be exactly like a lamp was glued to the desk. There was actually I was there because I had to tear it down. There was a pencil glued to the table so it would be where he wanted it every day. And if you can imagine, Brother Ed and I did not get along because, like, whatever OCD is, I'm the polar opposite. My father says I'm obsessive. He says I'm manic oppressive. I'm just always on the run, and always. My abbot keeps asking me why I never became a Franciscan, and because I'm just constantly on the move, and I can't be anywhere on time. And everything's a mess. And poor Brother Ed had to sit next to me in choir for 6 years. And I may have rearranged his books once or twice. I'm not proud of it, but I was curious, you know, and he may have thrown away my rugby equipment once or twice in revenge. And then, God bless the abbot, his indiscernible wisdom led him to make me the kitchen master, would put me in charge of all the meals for the monastery, which meant the monks just didn't eat sometimes. Maybe that was the point of it. And then put Brother Ed in charge of the dishes. So the two of us were always fighting. And by that I mean, because in a monastery you have to have a very quiet fight. So I would say, and he would be like, and that was pretty much it. Because we have a fairly strict monastery. And it didn't take long for the abbot to realize the error of his ways and decided I was more suited to the intellectual than the practical life. And sent me off to Oxford to do my studies. But as a thank you to the monastery, I made a big feast for the monks as a thank you for all their patience with me, which was awful, really. But the last course was pretty good because my mother had taught me as a kid how to make a chocolate walnut torte, which, for those of you who don't know, is like a cake except without any air in it, so there's no wasted stomach space. And I made 6 chocolate tortes for 24 monks. Which is way more than they needed on purpose because I wanted to have enough for myself for later. Again, I never said I was a good monk. In fact, when the abbot put me in charge of vocations, I looked at it, in spite of myself, I said, but I'm a terrible monk. And he said, yeah, but your heart's in the right place. So I made this big feast, and I made the chocolate torte, and I cut a piece of chocolate torte for myself for the next morning, and I wrapped it carefully in silver foil, and I hid it behind the mayonnaise in the refrigerator. Because in a monastery, if you don't want anybody to touch your food, you put it behind the mayonnaise, because nobody knows how long that stuff's been there. And the next morning, I woke up extra early, and I got my favorite chair, and I put it on the back porch, and I had my favorite book and a cup of coffee. I got my chocolate torte out from behind the mayonnaise and I unwrapped it. And someone had gotten there first. Yeah, I hadn't just gotten there. Had unwrapped the chocolate torte and taken a bite out of it. Like I could see the teeth marks in the chocolate torte. And then wrapped it up exactly as I had wrapped it. And then carefully placed it exactly in the, and there was only one man capable of this meticulous insensitivity. And even now, the depths of rage that well up. And I cried out to God for vengeance. But I managed to swallow my rage. And I went back and I cut another piece of torte and I wrapped it in silver foil, put it back in the fridge behind the mayonnaise. But first I soaked it in Lee & Pepper super hot Cajuns. So the next morning, when I woke up, I went down to the kitchen and sure enough, there was chocolate torte sprayed all over the refrigerator door. It was like the greatest moment of my life. And again, you can't really rub it in a quiet monastery. So I would just, when I'd see Brother Ed walking toward me, I'd be like, which made me feel really good for a while. And then the abbot sent me off to Oxford. And a couple of weeks after that, I got an email from the abbot telling me Brother Ed had gotten sick. It had nothing to do with the chocolate torte. He had some sort of cancer. And then I started to think maybe that wasn't the best moment of my life after all. Like here was this crazy old dude. He'd been in the monastery far longer than I had. And, he wanted a bite of chocolate torte. I could have made him his own chocolate. I had enough for both of us. I could have cut 2 pieces of chocolate torte, put a bow on it with his name, And so I felt pretty bad. And then I felt really bad a couple of weeks later when I got the news that he had died, right? So to make a long story a little longer, I came back from Oxford, and I was moving back into my cell. And as I was unpacking my stuff, I noticed there's a brown package on the nightstand next to my bed. And I picked it up, and it was very carefully wrapped in brown paper that had been cut off of a grocery bag and taped, scotch taped, and then tied with twine. And it occurred to me that there was one guy who was capable of that kind of meticulous work. And so I cut the twine, and I opened up the paper, and it was Brother Ed's copy of The Sun Also Rises.
Oh.
Well, yeah, with a little note that said, sorry, we'll stick 'em.
Oh.
And that's when I realized, like, Brother Ed, had seen his death coming, right? All of a sudden, his whole life, all the priorities had straightened out. And he said to himself, oh my God, I've got to make good with Brother Augustine. And I, who thought I was going to live forever, was off in Oxford having a good time and forgetting about it. And I think this is another point. This is the whole point of smearing ash on your forehead and saying, to death, from dust you came, to dust you shall return. That this, not only is this something to look forward to, but it's also something that'll put in perspective the little annoyances in your life. When I took solemn vows as a monk, that very same year my sister got married, and she asked me to give the toast at her wedding. And I don't have a dog in that fight. I'm never getting married. I don't care. But I like my sister, which is a huge surprise to me. When I was little, fairly little, I took my dad aside and I told him I'd had enough and that it was time to give her up for adoption. And my father had said to take me aside and said, listen, I know she's annoying. She annoys me sometimes. And you don't like her now, but there's going to come a day when you discover that you like your sister. You're going to want to hang out with her. But until that day comes, fake it. and it was excellent advice, really. I mean, that's Aristotelian mystic virtue theory in a nutshell. You fake it until suddenly you're virtuous. No one's born brave. You pretend like you're brave until you are. Father Timothy used to tell the story of he made it up, the story of the happy heretic, which was this lecherous old man who falls in love with a beautiful young girl and decides he's going to seduce her. But she's really pious, so he pretends like he's pious. And he goes to church every Sunday and gets her attention. But he realizes he can't actually seduce her. He's got to marry her first. So he thinks, well, okay. But then he realizes she won't stay with him unless he keeps up the ruse, right? So for decades, he pretends like he's this holy guy. And then he's surprised when he dies and goes to heaven. The point being that he faked it for so long that even without his realizing it, he eventually became a decent guy. And I think that can happen to all of us. It certainly happened to me with regard to my sister. Though I got to tell you a little footnote here, which is my sister and I had a contest to see who could be the most annoying, which I definitively won. My sister joined the army eventually, and was sent to Bosnia. My mom says she doesn't know what she did wrong. Well, did. But her daughter wears combat boots and her son wears a dress. So we're a really alternative family. But anyway, so my sister went to Bosnia, and I was sent to Bosnia, and I asked her what she really, really missed from home, and she said, I really miss the Sunday funnies. So I spent a year collecting all the Sunday funnies, and then I sent them to her in a box. But first I cut the last panel off of every single one. And then a week later I sent her a box with all the last panels completely mixed up. She says she spent her entire tour of Bosnia trying to figure out which blondie which and apparently all the last panels are exactly alike. It's always Dagwood going, I have totally forgotten where I was. Death, something about death, faking it, virtue. Married. Oh yes, so she got married. And she asked me to give the toast at her wedding. Thank you, good job, well done. I've got holy cards. I can give you. Not to be too nunnish about this, but you get a holy card for it. This is my favorite saint. He's Justus Takayama Yukon. I had to make my own holy cards because.
Can you sign that?
Yeah, sure. He was a samurai, and he was just beatified in January by Pope Francis, and I really feel like there ought to be more samurais on the church's calendar. But he ran around Japan killing anyone who wouldn't convert. And the Jesuits ran after him, going, "No, Takayama, that's not how to do it." So he said, "Okay." And he hung up his sword, and he said, "From now on, I fight not with the katana, but with the words of our Lord Jesus Christ." Which turned out to be less effective than the katana, because I exiled him to the Philippines where he died of malaria. Which didn't make him a great samurai, but it did make him a great saint. So I've got probably enough for a fourth of you. So whoever's fastest gets one. Let's see. Death. Oh man, I still haven't got to the story I was telling about my sister's marriage. So thank you. I didn't know what to say at my sister's wedding, but I did what I do. What I always do is I go to one of the old guys, and I found Father Patrick asleep in a chair in the calefactory, which is monkish for a living room. And I tapped him on the shoulder. He's an old English fella, and I said to him, "Father Patrick." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, I got to give this toast at my sister's wedding. I don't know what to say. What do I tell her?" He said, He said, "You tell her that the day will come when she will want the window open, and he will want the window closed." And he went back to sleep. I had no idea what he meant. But it sounded good to me, so that's the toast I gave at my sister's wedding. I said, "One day, Brent, Jessica, you will want the window." And everybody thought I was really wise, and they were like, "What does that mean?" And I was like, "You're just going to have to live your way to the answer, because I can't." And I told, anytime I would be asked to give a sermon and couldn't think of anything, this is what I would say. And actually, not too long ago, I was preaching, I say Mass once a month for the Missionaries of Charity, who are all about this big, by the way. I have a friend, and they don't look like these. Even though, I have a friend who's Canadian, who joined and she came back, and they're wonderful, and boy, do they not take any crud from me. But mostly they laugh at me. But so I said, so we had Mass not too long ago, and it was Jacob and Esau with their father Isaac, and Jacob disguises himself as Esau by putting fur on his arms, and so Sister John Mark is up there giving the reading. She's like, "You are Esau, my fuzzbug." And I'm like, "My what?" "My fuzzbug." He keeps saying, "You are Esau, my fuzzball?" What is it? And by the time it came time for the reading, I totally forgot my sermon, and I was just like, "Is that Jesus?" Okay. Anyway, so I'm a little ADHD, in case you haven't noticed. So I said to them, "The day will come when one of you will want the window open, and the other one," and they all went, "Oh, Father." And then I said, "I can't lie to them." I got it. I said, "All right, I have no idea what that means. I just say it whenever I can't think of anything else." And Sam, I did. And afterwards, Sister John Mark comes up to me, and she's great. I went through a phase once where I thought I should be a missionary of charity, and she said, "Oh, Father Augustine," he said, "we are called to be invisible. You are not called to be invisible." That was it. She shattered my dreams. But she comes up to me and she says, "I know what, I won't try to tell the whole story in her accent because it's insulting, really. But she told me she was assigned to this convent in the Amazon. There were 7 of them in a steel hut with 2 windows and a door, and they had cots. And every night they would sleep in this steaming hut, and it was made all the worse because one of them was from the Amazon and would come in every night, wake up, and close all the windows and the door. And she said for like 5 years we slept in this hot steel box, silently praying that she would be transferred. And she was finally transferred out. And she said, we didn't celebrate exactly, but we opened all the windows and the door, and we slept with this cross breeze all night. And we woke the next morning with snakes in our beds. And she said, the reason why your abbot said this is because you cannot assume that your brother once is a jerk. Well, I don't know if she said jerk, but you just can't assume that the reason people do things is because they're jerks. They might be jerks, but you can't assume that first. In fact, what's wisest is to assume they have the same motives you would under similar circumstances. In fact, I'm writing this book on decision making because I find that now that I'm the vocation guy, I run into all these kids who are like, well, I should do this, but I could do that, and they just can't make up their mind. And in one of these books, they talk about, one of these psychology books, they talk about something called the fundamental attribution error. If you want to sound really cool, you can use that phrase sometime. And it's this, that when I do something shady, it's because I have to, because the circumstances dictate that this is okay. So I cut in front of somebody in line at the grocery store because it's an emergency. And I've had a horrible day. And I didn't see them anyway, and I'm sure they understand, just from looking at me, that I've had a terrible time, and I just got to get out of there, and they'll understand, right? But if somebody cuts in front of me, it's because they're a jerk, right? Or another way of looking at it is, when you're on the highway, everybody that passes you is a maniac, and everybody you pass is a moron. But somehow you picked like the perfect speed. You're like the only person on the highway who picked the perfect speed. I didn't make that up. I think some comedian said that. But forget morality for a second. It's just logically inconsistent to judge other people by a different standard than you judge your neighbor. And again, to bring this back to Lent, I think this is another reason why we keep death before our eyes, why we reevaluate, why we do an examination of conscience every night, why we take on some extra penance, read an extra book, is to get an accurate understanding of ourselves and the world. And I've written this book on humility. I guess, I don't know if you told them this, but in case you couldn't tell, just from looking at me. And so I run around the country talking to kids about humility, because I've had enough of self-esteem. Just for the record, I think we've just filled our kids with just tons of empty cliches, and it's about time they understood what, well anyway. But humility isn't necessarily self-deprecation, right? I think it's Justin Martyr says, what did he say? If you deny that God has given you gifts, it does him no service, right? Or Dizzy Dean said, it ain't bragging if you've done it, right? Is another way of thinking about it. In fact, so when you're bad at something, you just got to admit it to yourself. These phrases like, you're perfect just the way you are, you're not, okay? You can do anything just as long as you put your mind to it. You can't, okay? I've got Parkinson's, right, from playing 18 years of rugby. I've been hitting the head so many times, my right side constantly trembles, right? And I am never going to be a brain surgeon. Okay? And if you ever see me coming towards you while you're on the operating, run, because I should never follow that dream. I have a student who sorry, I can't think of him without laughing because his last name was Paul Dyke. And he married a girl named Misha Shitty. And I swear, on my honor, this is the truth. And I promised I would marry them so long as they did not hyphenate their name. And she was like, I've been waiting my whole life to marry someone with a better name than Shitty. And I think the one guy in the world with the worst name. But they're both brilliant. He's a cardiac surgeon and she's a neonatal something or other. They're both doctors, and he said to me, his supervising physician or whatever, the guy who trained him, took him aside after one surgery and said, "Show me your hands." And he said, so I did. And he said, "You know, when I was growing up, I wanted to be an Olympic swimmer." He's like, and my parents sent me to this special school run by Russians that would train me to be an Olympic swimmer. And one day after practice, Mr. Ravinsky took me aside and he said, "Show me your hands." And I did. And he said, "You'll never be an Olympic swimmer." He said, and he shattered my dreams. He said, and thank God for Mr. Ravinsky because these tiny little hands are really good at cardiac surgery. So humility, I think, is about accurate self-perception. I'll tell you two more stories before I leave. Which is, I have a friend I met at Oxford who lives in a castle. And I didn't know he lived in a castle when he invited me to Christmas dinner. And his mom picked me up and drove me out there. And I'm, of course, completely divorced from any attachment to material possessions. But when we turned the corner and I saw their house, I went, whoa! It's like 6 stories with its own tennis courts and golf course and Eucharistic adoration chapel. And I was just blown away. And I looked over at her and she goes, "Yeah! Aren't we blessed?" Like that, which shocked me even more than seeing the castle, right? Because you would have thought she'd have said, "Oh, well, you know, it's really hard to keep up," or "We don't live in the whole thing," or "Well, we rent it out," you know. Or no, she looked at it and it was just as cool to her as it was to me. A couple of years later, I invited Mr. Hill to come out and talk to my students, and he had just closed a deal for $19 billion, which gives you a sense of the kind of business he does. And what's that? Pretty what? Shady? Okay, shady. Good. Yeah. Well, maybe. The thing is, well, a little background on him. He got in a horrible car wreck, was in a coma, and when he came out of his coma, his business partners had stolen everything. And so he made a vow that he was going to change his life. He went off to India seeking enlightenment and asked the taxi driver to take him to a shrine. And apparently the taxi driver misunderstood him, took him to Mother Teresa's home for the dying. And she opened the door. And he said, "You're Mother Teresa." And she said, "Yes, I am. Do you know anything about property law?" And he said, "That's my field." And she said, "Come in, I've been waiting." And she and he worked together for about 2 weeks, straightened out all of her finances. And he said, "All right, I'm selling everything. I'm coming to India. I'm going to work with you for the rest of my life. We're going to bring my whole family." And she said, "Absolutely not. You go back and you bring Jesus to the world of high finance," which he did. He made a vow never to make a deal he wouldn't take if he were the other guy. And he said the first couple of deals he did, they were like, he'd be like, "You really ought to ask for a couple more billion," you know, or "This just isn't good for you," you know. And they were real suspicious. And then now he just negotiates. He just tells other people. He's paid to tell other people whether their deals are fair. But in any case, he came and spoke to Priory to the seniors, and one of the seniors. This is why I love teaching smart kids. One of the kids raised his hand and he said, "So you're pretty rich, huh?" And he goes, "Yeah." He says, "I own a house on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean in Saint-Tropez." Like, he goes, "Yeah, sure, okay. But you're detached from all that wealth." And he goes, "Well, you know, I try to be." He goes, "Great, can I have some?" and I looked at Mr. Hill like, oh, he's got you now. And he said, I will go home and I will pray about it. But I do doubt that the Holy Spirit wants me to give away my money to random high school seniors. He's like, the point is, he said, the thing is, this isn't my money. It was given to me. It's a gift, right? And in a few decades, I'll be gone, and this will be someone else's money. So it's on loan. And I can't just give it away any way I want. It's precisely because it's not my money that I can't just give it to you. But if you're serious, I'll go and I'll pray about it. And of course, he wasn't. So I'm almost out of time here. But I'll leave you with one more story, which is that. You all right over there? Oh, there's one in every crowd. Look at this guy. You should be playing rugby for Priory, by the way. No, we'll talk about that later. When I went off to the monastery 2 years after grad school, my roommate from college. Well, actually, let me back up just a little bit. I was not, no, forget it. I'm writing a book on decision making for a reason. I was not popular in high school. This is probably comes as no surprise to Skinny Flinny, but, and so when I got to college, I was like, I'm going to find the coolest guy at Rice University, which didn't say much, and I'm going to hang out with him. And I heard these girls talking about this guy who was a Giorgio Armani model who was super good looking. He's beautiful. I was like, that's the guy. I'm gonna hang out with him. So I did. I found him. I made him my friend. We were roommates. And then after college, when I went off to the monastery, he went off to LA to become a famous actor, which he did. He was on Days of Our Lives and Jag, and it was in a movie called Devil's Playground, which is much better than it sounds, and lived upstairs from Heather Graham. He calls it, I got about a phone call every other month in the monastery that I could make to a friend, and so I'd always call and then he'd be like, oh, guess who's Teen Magazine's hunk of the month? And I'd be like, I'm in the monastery, so yeah. And he'd say, yeah, and then, or guess who had dinner with Emmylou Harris last night? And I'd be like, oh, I still don't know who Emmylou Harris is, but to this day, I really want to have dinner with her because his life just seems so romantic, so cool. He ended up marrying a Sports Illustrated model, and then moving to New York. I got to take a little time out here because I think I hope I didn't mention his name. He asked me not to, but he sounds like a real sort of materialistic kind of guy, and he kind of was, but he's a sincerely good person. For his 15-year anniversary, he had his wife's name tattooed on his shoulder, because when you don't have religion, you got to find some other way of making things permanent. And a friend who designs credits for the movies designed this tattoo, and he took her out to dinner, and he said, "Happy anniversary," and he showed her his tattoo, and she went, "Is that Janelle with one N or two?" He had misspelled her name on his tattoo, right? Yeah. So the next year, for their anniversary, she took him out to dinner, and it had her name legally changed, so it was spelled with one N, right? Yeah, so these are good people, okay? And as a footnote, 3 years ago, he and Janelle and his whole family converted to Catholicism, so they're on their way now. But at this point, he was still in the midst of his movie, and he quit the whole movie star thing and is now editing a magazine instead, living in Houston, Dallas, I don't know what to say that. And anyway, so the point is, I took solemn vows, against all odds, I took solemn vows, and the monks let me take solemn vows. And then the abbot sent me off to do my studies. And I asked the abbot if I could stay for 2 days with a friend who lived in New York. And he said, okay. And this friend was, And New York, for those of you who haven't been there, is awful. It stinks. It's dirty, and it smells like urine and old cheese. If you that's what I decided. But unless you're with a movie star, in which case it's awesome. And for 2 days I lived like a movie star. And on the last day, that evening, he had this party for me, which was like, I can't. If you watch the movies, this is what the party looked like these beautiful people, these beautiful waiters walking around with these beautiful hors d'oeuvres on beautiful plates with beautiful drinks, and everybody was models and actors and directors, and he had this apartment on the top of a skyscraper in the meat packing district, which is apparently cool. And I was sitting there in the middle of all this, just in awe of it, and sitting on the couch, looking out over New York, having a total nervous breakdown, a complete vocation crisis unto myself, when this jewelry designer from Soho, named Charlotte, sits down next to me, and she says, "So, why'd you have to become a monk? Right? Isn't it enough just to be a good person?" And really, she could not have picked a worse time to ask me this question. But as sometimes happens, the Holy Spirit stepped in on my behalf, and I thought about it for a second, and I looked at her, and I took my beautiful drink, and I set it on the table, and I flicked my beautiful hors d'oeuvre across the room, and I said to her, No, it's not enough just to be a good person, right? I mean, that's the minimum, is to be a good person. Because what's the alternative to being a good person? It's being a bad person. No one's called to be a bad person, right? We're all called to be good people. We're supposed to be good people. That's the minimum. Like, I want to be a saint, right? Like, I mean, I want to give till it hurts, right? And then I went off to the bathroom and I cried. But the point is, and I'll leave you with this, that all this talk of humility and apologies and penance and stuff, this is not to be confused with mediocrity, okay? We're called to be saints, right? Every single one of us. And if you leave tonight without being any better than when you got here, then I have not done my job. Like, you've got to figure out a way to give a little more even than you're already giving. Because if you're here tonight on I lost my watch. on whatever night this is, then you're well on your way. But this is not enough. Can I tell one more story? Yeah. Okay, which is that we have this wonderful benefactor of the monastery named Jordan Cherrick, who is an Orthodox Jew. And it happened that the monks were friends of his father. When he had his firstborn son, the kid died at 2 years old. And the monks all went to the funeral, but they weren't allowed into the synagogue because it's an Orthodox synagogue. And so they stood outside and prayed. I mean, if anyone understands rules, it's monks, right? So they were like, no, it's totally cool, stand out here. Anyway, he was so taken with this that he decided this was his job now, to be the go-between between Catholics and Jews. This was going to be his thing. And so he comes in once or twice a week. He's endowed like a third of the monastery. He comes in once or twice a week and sings the Psalms in Hebrew in front of the Blessed Sacrament in our chapel. And he's just this great man. And one of those types who will just talk about the scriptures for hours and exhaust you with it. And he was coming in one Saturday morning as I was leaving, and I was going out to preach the missions because there were these African monasteries that needed clean water or something. And I was like, "Pray for me, Jordan. I'm going out to beg." And he goes, "You need something?" I was like, No. I mean, there's these monasteries that need something. He goes, "Well, then don't call it begging." He's like, "You're doing them a favor, right? To give without the hope of thanks is the highest mitzvah. So wherever you're going to beg, it's not begging, you're doing them the favor, right?" And so I threw out my sermon and I just got up at the pulpit and I was like, "Listen, I'm about to do you people a favor here, all right? I want you to give. And give till it hurts, okay? Because like Jesus might want your leftovers, But, or these African monks might want your leftovers, but Jesus doesn't, okay? Like, and it didn't go over real well. But I'll say it to you, Jesus doesn't want your leftovers, okay? You've got to give till it hurts and make this, if this parish isn't full of saints already, then it's your job to make it that way. And you got to start with yourself. So let us pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, dear God, make us saints. Make everyone in this room a canonized saint within the next 100 years. And why not? I mean, that is what we are all called to be. So we wrap up all these intentions, all of our intentions, and all of our frustrations in the mantle of Our Lady as we say together, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Blessed Justus Tapiyama Yukon, pray for us. Thank you for your patience and good humor, and I owe you one. So if you ever need anything else, just let me know, and I'll try to show up.